Hello, and welcome to the American Floral Endowment's three-part webinar series for Thrips Research. Throughout this series, we will hear the latest findings from AFE's Thrips Botrytis Research Fund. AFE is the national nonprofit organization that funds scientific research to identify and solve challenges within the floriculture industry. In 2021, AFE is celebrating 60 years of providing for the future of floral. In 2017, after listening to important industry feedback, AFE established a special research fund to aggressively address the control and management of Thrips Botrytis. AFE's goal of reaching 1.5 million in pledges was met in 2019, with contributions from 24 industry leaders and organizations to support new and innovative research to address these challenges. With those funds, AFE has been able to support 8 multi-year research projects to reduce losses and produce higher quality flowers and plants. The American Floral Endowment and all researchers would like to thank all of the organizations who have made contributions in support of this important initiative. Today's speaker is Dr. Rose Buitenhuis, Research Scientist of Biological Control at the Vineland Research and Innovation Center.
Thank you so much. It's great to have this platform here to share some of the research and the stuff we do at the Vineland Research Center, but also at our collaborating organizations. So this is a 3-part series, and I will start off the series with a presentation about the challenges of controlling thrips. Next week, I'll present the opportunities and, of course, the challenges to use biocontrol against thrips. And then in 2 weeks' time, JC will take over and talk about managing thrips with pesticides. So first, a bit of background. This presentation is all about why thrips are a pest, and they are definitely a pest. This slide shows the results from a survey that we've done in 2014, but then we repeated it in 2017. And we found that thrips in Ontario are #1 pest, but also worldwide thrips are a #1 pest, and I think for the same reasons. So what does it mean to be #1 pest? In our most recent survey, like I said, of flower growers in Ontario, in Canada, we asked them about their most troublesome pests in 3 different ways. And their responses pointed very clearly towards thrips. By far, the pests that caused the most losses, as you can see circled here, were thrips. The average reported losses were between 5 and 10%, which is moderate, but if it does add up. The other pests that caused most losses following thrips were 2 spotted spider mites and broad mites, and then aphids, several species of aphids. Thrips were also the most common pest, the pest that the growers had to deal with most often. We asked them at the same time if they were happy or unhappy with their current pest management program. And especially, you can see here in blue, the people that were happy with their pest management program, and in orange, the people that were not happy with their pest management program against the different pests that we asked about. So about 2/3 of the respondents were happy with their current thrips management program, and in Ontario, this is mainly biological control. However, as you can see in orange, 1/3 of the growers indicated that they were not happy with their thrips program. And this is probably because thrips are also the most difficult pest to control. Almost half of the growers said this was because the pesticides that are available in Canada were ineffective due to resistance development. In the same box, you can see that others indicated that pesticides they would like to use are not registered in Canada. And growers, therefore, are mainly using biocontrol. but not all growers obviously have found a reliable and cost-effective program that works for them, as you could see in the last slide. If this were not a virtual event, I would basically look around the room and ask you do you recognize yourself in this? What we could do is that you type something in the chat or in the question and answer if you disagree or agree with that, and I can react to that. But overall, I suspect that growers run into the same issues worldwide, and this is not only an Ontario issue. So I always like to show people, like, how do thrips actually damage the crops? And I found these wonderful pictures in a recent article that's referenced Kind et al. From 2003. Thrips cause problems in several ways. First of all, of course, they're feeding damage. Damages the plant foliage and the flowers. And the damage is very visible as spots and growth deformities. And unacceptable, of course, in floriculture, where you sell plants for their beauty. Thrips have piercing, sucking mouthparts and a unique punch and suck feeding strategy. So they feed on the individual cells in the epidermis and the mesophyll, and they pierce the cell with their stylets, and then they chunk up the tissues, secrete saliva to extraorally digest plant tissue. So basically they salivate in the cells, and then that digests the contents partly, and then they suck out the cell contents. So this results, as you can see here, in extensive pockets of cell damage. These cells are basically just sucked out. Rupture cells will then fill with air, and that gives them their silvery appearance that you can see here. Then, to add insult to, how do you say it? To add insult to injury, they also poop out a dark green liquid, which are the dark flecks that you can often see around the silvery damage. Besides feeding damage, Western flower thrips also vector at least 7 species of Tospoviruses. And the most common, and you may know all this already, but the most common in floriculture crops are the tomato spotted wilt virus and the impatient necrotic spot Tospovirus, and a few others in the same virus family. And this is very problematic because the feeding damage maybe causes 5 to 10% losses, but virus infection can lead to total crop loss. Western flower thrips become only vectors if they get the virus as first or second instar larvae. And then the transmission to other plants is mostly done by young adult thrips. And male thrips are especially bad for this because they feed less intense and make a lot of little probes where they don't really settle down to feed. So this causes minimal damage to the plants, but really facilitates this viral infection. And finally, thrips are a major border issue. They're huge pests, and if they are found at the border on plant material, this can result in the rejection of an entire shipment or very expensive cleanup treatments. So those are all the different ways that thrips can be a pest. But why are they so difficult to control? So in the next few slides, I would like to go a bit more deeper into this and hopefully explain by their biology and their behavior to understand why they're so difficult to control, and maybe help develop some strategies to fight the thrips. So first of all, thrips, we call them thicmotactic insects. And this means that they like to squeeze into cracks or crevices by their preferences for close quarters. And this behavior makes them very difficult to control because they hide in large numbers in places where pesticides may not reach. In addition, thrips eggs, you can see a picture here, they are inserted in the leaf tissue, and the pupae pupate in the substrate or in other concealed places. And again, this protects them from direct sprays. In this case, systemic or translaminar pesticides may help, and I'll leave it up to JC to tell you all about that. The second reason why thrips are so difficult to control is that when unchecked, thrips populations can increase very rapidly. A thrips female lays about 7 eggs a day, and since she can live for more than a month, she easily produces over 200 offspring in her life. The young thrips also grow up very quickly and are ready to reproduce in about 9 to 13 days at temperatures around 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. For our American friends, that's 77 to 86 Fahrenheit. So this means that the population can go from 1 to about 6,000–7,000 in about 42 days. So it's very important to stay on top of thrips control because they can get out of hand very quickly when you're not looking. Third of all, it seems like thrips can eat almost anything. Their host range spans over 500 plant species in about 60 families, and that includes about 250 crop species as well. So almost any plant can be a source of or a refuge for thrips. And here you have to think about weeds in the greenhouse. They're also able to switch host plants quite easily. And after a generation or two on a new host, they will adapt very quickly. They're able to cope with the diversity of plant defenses because they're very good at detoxifying plant defensive compounds. Unfortunately, this also enables them to detoxify a whole range of insecticide classes. So there's at least 175 documented cases of insecticide resistance in Western flower thrips from around the world, involving at least 8 different mode of action groups. Finally, genetically, thrips do not leave much up to chance, and especially the males. They have this interesting mating structure where unfertilized eggs become males, which only have a full set of chromosomes. So traits like pesticide resistance or adaptation to a new environment are on the direct selection in the males, and only the successful genes make it to the next generation. So if you imagine that the red in this picture here is something like resistance or adaptation to a new environment, that one makes it directly into the next generation in males. Now, females have 2 sets of chromosomes, and they have this very convenient for them behavior that when they cannot mate, they can still reproduce, but then they only make males. So in most cases, the female will live long enough to mate with her own offspring. So that means that one female is enough to found a whole new population. Still, I would say thrips could not have achieved their perfect pest status without some help from us, humans. Originally, Western flower thrips were native of Western North America. And it's very likely that intensive insecticide use in the 1970s and 1980s resulted in highly insecticide-resistant strain or multiple insecticide-resistant strains, which then spread throughout North America and to many countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia. On their own, thrips can disperse through flying short distances and being carried on wind currents over longer distances. But I would say most of the spread of thrips worldwide was and still is facilitated by the global movement of plant materials, such as fruits, cuttings, seedlings, and potted plants. In Ontario, Canada, thrips were the main cause for growers to actually switch to biocontrol-based IPM strategies. And this may be the same in some of other jurisdictions as well. Within a period of about 15 years, the Ontario greenhouse flower industry has switched from mainly pesticides-based to biocontrol-based pest management. And this is all because of thrips. So Canada does not have as many pesticide registers as in other countries. And combine this with the rapid development of resistance, and you will start to understand. So when thrips developed resistance to spinosad, Canadian growers were basically left with few or actually no registered pesticide compounds that really worked and that were compatible. And thrips, which were formerly basically the major obstacle to greater use of biocontrol because you had to spray so much for them, became actually the primary driver of change to biocontrol. So thrips have kept me employed for almost 15 years now. And in that time, me and my colleagues from all over the world, we've done a lot of research on biocontrol of thrips, and it really paid off. Ontario flower growers are managing thrips mainly biologically. I could show you some graphs, but in summary, about 70% of growers' biocontrol budget is spent on thrips. So that's how important they are. In addition, the switch to biocontrol for thrips made it necessary to use biocontrol for other pests as well, because there are just a limited number of pesticides that are compatible with the natural enemies used for thrips control. And I'm very curious, hopefully we can discuss during the question period if this is the case for you as well. So I call this really a paradigm shift from biocontrol, from chemical control to biocontrol. So contrary to reactive chemical pest control, which generally has a rapid and very easily observed effect on pest numbers, biological control is best used in a preventative manner, and also effects are less evident in the short term. So that makes it a little bit harder because you have to predict pest outbreaks and establish biocontrol agents before the pest numbers exceed like a critical threshold or even before they're there. However, biocontrol-based IPM requires more than that. We really need to understand the reason why there are pest outbreaks. If not, we will always face a recurrent pest problem. So this paradigm shift that I'm talking about involves a change from reactive interventions to redesigning the components of the production ecosystem to address these underlying weaknesses that have allowed organisms like thrips to be pests. And this is what we call the systems approach. In other words, fixing a situation that is inherently flawed takes a lot of effort and money. So we better do something about these underlying weaknesses. So this is what the systems approach looks like. So at the basis of every IPM program is the right plant, ideally resistant or not susceptible to pests, not stressed and not overfed with nutrients. These plants should be grown in an environment that is pest-free or that disadvantages pests as much as possible. So once you have this good foundation, it will be much easier to manage the pests that remain with biocontrol or with pesticides if you need them and if they still work. So yay for Canada. The Ontario growers obviously are using a lot of biocontrol. For most of them, it seems to work as well. What about thrips control in outside of Canada? And I would say, although other countries like the US have more pesticide options available, I think the issues still remain the same. And worldwide, pesticide resistance management is essential to maintain the efficacy of the few chemical options that are left, because there's less and less new pesticides coming onto the market. And I'm sure JC will talk more about that as well. And really, the systems approach from previous slide emphasizes that first you want to use non-chemical tools so that when you need them, you still have pesticides that work. This basically is my last slide, and this is a rather short presentation. Well, I guess we've done a few minutes, but at this point I would like to stop, because next week I will talk about the biological control options that are there. And even in countries like Colombia, where there's less biocontrol options, what are the things that you can still do to control thrips? So with that, here is my email address. If ever you have questions and you can't post them right away, if you want to contact me later, that's where you can reach me.
Additional findings from all of AFE's research can be found online at www.endowment.org. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. Research and research findings like those presented today are possible only through industry support and contributions. Thanks to generous donors, AFE can provide research solutions free to support a stronger industry. Consider making a tax-deductible contribution to support the future of the floral industry. Visit endowment.org today and check back often for new sessions and updates.